Okay, good evening. Welcome to our webinar tonight on pollinators. And we are happy to be broadcasting from the heritage lands of the Haudenosaunee Six Nations people. My name is Cheryl Frank. I'm from Color Bright and Green, and we are sponsoring this event with the library. I'm going to introduce you to Mitch Nellis from Color Bright and Green, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Hi, I'm Mitch Nellis with Color Bright and Green. Tonight we'll be talking with Tom Snyder with the Seneca Park Zoo Society. I'm going to introduce him as lover of insects everywhere and saver of all insect life through planting of pollinator habitat. I've worked with Tom on a couple of projects, and we're currently involved in a project with the town of Brighton to reclaim some land and give it back to pollinators, and he's helping us out with that. And he's our go-to expert in the area. I might be playing him up above how comfortable he is. However, he is our pollinator expert, and he's going to walk us through some of his knowledge.
Well, thank you. I don't, as I said, or as you said, you might have pumped me up a little bit too much, but first, I appreciate everybody coming tonight. And I'm speaking really about planting native and what that means. So I've got a PowerPoint. I'll draw some parallels between some of the projects that we have at the zoo that are overseas, and then talk and bring that back to this area and what planting native means for healthy families and healthy communities. So let me share my screen here, and we will start. So hopefully everybody can see that all right. Let me show my video panel to make sure so I can see if anybody has questions. Great. Yeah, so this talk is about planting native for healthier lawn and happier families. And as I said, my name is Tom Snyder. I am Director of Programming and Conservation Action for the Seneca Park Zoo Society. So essentially my department works a lot in the on-site programs. So if you're ever at the zoo and you're part of our summer programs in front of an animal habitat, that's my staff. Outreach programming like the Zoo Mobile that takes animals out to schools or goes out and does nature programming, things like that. Butterfly Beltway program, which is where some of the knowledge tonight that we'll be talking about comes from. But then I'm also liaison to a couple of our worldwide conservation projects. And the one that I'll be talking about and drawing parallels to is Madagascar tonight. And talking about the value of planting native for what it's like in Madagascar and then what it's like over here. So a very quick overview of the Seneca Park Zoo mission. Our mission, when it's boiled down, is connect, care, conserve. And what we really want is to inspire our community to act on behalf of nature. Our vision statement is about being a national leader in education and conservation of species. That's not how zoos have always been. They've, for a long time, have been animal collections and menageries, but a modern zoo is a conservation organization. And to put that into perspective, there's about 230 zoos in the nation that are AZA accredited. That means that we have strict animal welfare and conservation goals. And collectively, we donate over $200 million per year globally to 2,500 projects across 100 countries. So you are talking conservation organizations for sure on a global scale. When you look at Connect, it's very easy to see what zoos can do well. You can get within an inch of a sea lion, polar bear, right up close and personal, and get that aha moment, we call it, or a transformational experience. We then want somebody to care for those animals when they get that aha moment. So for instance, if you care about lions, then you care about what's happening to them in Africa. That allows us to then have you act on behalf of nature. And so in this picture, somebody's planting a native pollinator out at one of our gardens. We have roughly 300 gardens locally across the last 15 years that we've created. Somewhere along the lines, they went to cultivars and weren't really so native and weren't probably the best that we could do. But we've since really taken a very serious approach to native plantings and making sure that we are creating native habitat and restoring native habitat. When we talk about nature and the projects that the zoo does, whether it's our urban ecology program downtown in Rochester, or if we're going out to a rural village, or if we're working in a rural village in Borneo, What we know is that there are health benefits to nature, and they are almost instantaneous when you have nature around you. It only takes a couple minutes of you sitting outside for your blood pressure to go down, for your muscle tension to relieve. I know that COVID over this last year, my grandmother is in a senior center in Florida, and she was relegated to her room for pretty much a year. And I can tell you that, boy, that first day that she got out and just got a little sunshine on her face, right? You can just every portion of your body absorbs that. And it's no different in many places of the world. So with that, I'm going to start talking about one of the most tragic places I've been, but also one of the most beautiful places. And this is a common sight in Madagascar. And I use this when we talk about a population that's disconnected from nature. And we really explore that thought of being disconnected from nature at the zoo and what that means. If you can't tell what this is a family group in Madagascar that's going through the daily dump trash to look for basically anything of value. If you look behind them, it looks like there's a whole bunch of trees, but these are all eucalyptus trees. So these are foreign owned, they're cut down by foreigners, they're exported by foreigners, and none of that money comes back to these people. Extreme case, absolutely. We don't have that type of problem here by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a lot of similarities between people that don't have the freedoms or the abilities or the access or the equity to get out in nature or have that around them. It's always surprising to me that in an area that is biodiverse, as richly biodiverse as Madagascar, none of the native Madagascar people are really connected to nature. Any forest that starts gets burned down almost immediately because they need charcoal. And this is about the largest circumference of a tree that you'll see in that country. So again, it doesn't sound like planting native is what we're talking about yet, but one of the solutions that we have for the zoo is actually a program called Madagascar Tree. And what that is about is creating homesteads again. And this is a thought that we are trying to bring back to this area, to the US in general. I'm sure some people, have farms that you grew up on and homesteads where you had fruit and meat and everything that you needed right there. We've gotten way away from that. So our project in Madagascar really comes down to the southeast quadrant. And what we're looking to do is reforest this area. This little strip of trees in dark green is one of the most biodiverse, rich areas on the planet. And we work specifically in this area, which is Ranamafan National Park. And one of the reasons that I'm talking about this today is because this place has many ties to Rochester, not just the zoo. We have been supporting this organization for 30 years. And this national park was actually created by somebody that used to live in Rochester, and the building was actually designed by a firm Invictor. So there's a lot of real close ties to this. Ranamafan National Park is a World Heritage Site, many species of lemurs. There's also endemicism. So when we talk about native plants, an endemic plant means that lives there and nowhere else. We've got some endemic things here in New York, like the Chittenango ovate amber snail out in Chittenango, which is the most endangered animal that we have in New York. It's only about this big. And then there's some plants that we have that are endemic as well in New York. This field station, this is the field station that was made by the organization Invictor, or designed by the organization Invictor. And the reason that I'm showing you this is because these are the types of projects that are essentially a clone of what we do at the zoo out in the world. So as we look at the functions that we have in this facility, which are full conference centers, we have full offices, we have lab space so we can do lab work. We replicate a lot of the work that we do in the zoo in the lab space in Madagascar. Let's see. So when we talk about reforestation and planting native in Madagascar, this is what a traditional nursery looks like in Madagascar. It takes only a couple weeks for us to put up. We've now got 18 of these locally in and around Ranamafan National Park. This one in particular is a partner with the government, and we have a few problems right now with this facility. mainly that they're willing to do eucalyptus or any tree here. So we're starting to balance in this location whether just putting a tree in the ground and creating forest is valuable enough or if it needs to be native. What I can tell you is that our data shows us overwhelmingly, unfortunately, is the non-endemic or the non-native trees die. The Centralville Biofield Station that I was just showing you has only recreated about 25 acres worth of forest over the last 10 years because they were planting non-endemic trees and they would die and they'd come back and plant them again and come back and plant them again and come back and plant them again. So an incredible waste of time and energy because they just didn't choose the right trees. So when those trees leave and they come down to an area, which I'm gonna stop a little bit higher. If you look at this, this is all deforested. This used to be all forest. So when you look as a whole and all you have is this little strip of trees, you're looking at about 90% deforested on the island. This is Mbombay, and I've been here and I've been to this location in this village. This is a general what the communes look like, and they live in communes. The reason that I show you is because we reforested about 1 hectare in June of 2020 in mid-COVID. We do capacity building programs here as well. So we really do the same programs there as what we do back in Rochester. We do human health programs, we do conservation programs, and ultimately we teach the kids to be good stewards of the forest. And we also do research. So we look at what animals we can find. And the reason that I'm telling you this is because we do these projects back in Rochester where we look at what native insects we're finding and what the food web looks like. So you can start to draw ties, even though we're in one of the craziest places on the planet. We start using art for what we find and we start connecting through the art. So much like when you're planting a native pollinator, as long as you can appreciate the animals and the wildlife that you're finding, you can start to care and then you can conserve that species. And through the zoo, we do that through storytelling. And I'm sorry if you don't like spiders. The reason why I show this is because not everything is cute. Now, as Mitch said, I'm a lover of all insects and arachnids, so I actually think this is cute. But the reason that I show this to you is because functionally, this is probably one of the most important animals that I've ever found in Madagascar, and we did find this out in the forest. When you're identifying spiders, you look at their eyes, and there's multiple eyes on their heads right here, and they have a certain layout of their eyes, and you can then look and say, okay, that's this family group or this genus group of spiders. We couldn't find that with this, and it took about 2 months after we were back in New York before I found it. It was only found in 2010, and this is called the Darwins bark spider. And again, it looks like it will do a lot of damage to you. But because this animal lives in such a highly specialized location in Madagascar in a very turbulent air, this has the strongest natural fiber known to man. And the silk that this spreads can be up to 80 feet wide. So you are talking like, we know those little garden spiders that are about this wide. This thing can be 80 feet wide. And when you think about some of the services that we may be able to bring from understanding the silk that comes from this animal, it's a different value system on some of those animals that planting native and creating an ecosystem in your backyard can really bring to the table, and a different value system other than just cute looks or something like that. So let me get back to this. I wanted to show this to you because to put a face on some of the kids that we're teaching in Madagascar. So traditionally, these kids would work on a rice field with their family up to 150 days per year for about $100 per year in income. So they have to work 3 hectares, which is about 7 acres, in order to make $300 income per year. And I want you to just know that so you can see the scale of it and understand that while we may be disconnected from nature because we have lawns and different things that we've kind of manned landscape, These kids really are set out without even having any capacity building programs at all. So now that we have forests going in here, they'll work, the kids won't work at all on the forests. Hopefully they'll just play. That's the idea. But the parents will actually work about a third of the time or a quarter of the time, which gives us the ability to use those great facilities at the CVB to actually teach capacity and healthcare. So through planting native, we are starting to increase all capacity, starting to create an industry. And this is Leon, and Leon's 16 years old, and Leon works with us transporting trees and digging holes for reforestation. So he'll go out in the advanced team, and we pay him to do that. Well, he's actually probably 17 years old at this point. An adult version of Leon is Dominique. And Dominique now gives tours at Central Valbio at the field station. He's got a 4th grade education, but he's got 2 daughters that both have PhDs. And he's done that through the appreciation for nature in an area that makes as little as what I said, $1 a day. Dominique has put 2 kids through a doctor level school, and he's done that through communicating around the native wildlife that's there. As our projects grow and work there, we do the same thing in Madagascar or Borneo or South Africa or wherever that we do here, which is we try to impart knowledge in that connect, care, conserve mentality. So this is Professor Tony Vodacek from RIT, and he's teaching imaging science and remote sensing to the university in Madagascar, because these kids want to go out in the field and measure through technology some of the important native plants and trees that we have and the dependence that we have. So slowly we're building this ecosystem around native plants and native animals and the importance of healthy ecosystems. When we come back to Rochester, those same things apply. This is a class that's looking at our Urban Wildlife Information Network. What that is a set of, is 30 trail cameras that we have. So if you think about any of the wildlife cameras that you can buy at the sporting goods store, for the last 3 years, we've been putting those out at all of these dots along the lake and then down through the city, and the city all the way down to RITs over here and all the way down below RIT. And while this doesn't necessarily seem like it, again, goes back to plant native, we found 55 species in and around Rochester. That means that out of the 28, I think, cities now in US and Canada, we have the highest biodiversity, or one of the 2 highest mammal biodiversity areas in North America so far in the study. Doesn't mean that we necessarily have that, but when you think about that, the opportunity for connection to nature in Rochester is there. We've got the greenways that go through the city. We have the river that runs through the city. We have the Great Lakes right there. So we have the opportunity for us to really leverage that. And to give you a few pictures of some of the things that we have found, coyotes all over the place, which human-animal conflict, that can bring some problems. But this project, which is called UN, has actually created different laws in Chicago around coyotes. 10 years ago, if a coyote came and got into your trash out in front of your apartment in Chicago, that coyote would be hunted down and killed. Now the person gets a fee because they didn't put their trash out properly. So that animal conflict in Chicago has completely changed over this program saying, hey, they're here, we need to live with these. Oops, I muted myself again. Red foxes, another animal that is through there. A few years ago, they weren't around too much. Another animal that I doubt anybody here knows what this is. Maybe some of you do. This is a fisher. And a fisher is an animal that you don't really see around this area so much, but from my understanding, this is the first documented fisher in over 10 years in Rochester. And so when you think about that, there's implications to that if we're gonna try to tell everybody to plant native, right? If they're doing it the right way, then they're bringing the insects in, they're bringing the food web in, they're bringing the animals in that eat the insects, that eat those animals. And the propensity or the possibility for animal conflict is there. for sure. And so we have to do that responsibly. When we look at traditional lawns, this is a bit where I can get up on my soapbox, I think. I'm not a big fan of turf lawns, and you know, over our history, we've had a slow burn from Frederick Olmsted, and I think it was 1863 when he started Riverside in Chicago, actually, and that was the first subdivision in our nation that had every house had a lawn. And boy, that must have been something, right? You know, you're talking 1863 and no more homesteads. And as we moved through time, you know, the 1950s was really the time that we looked to scientific research to start to get control over the lawns and make them aesthetically pleasing. As we know, you know, as mowers became available and pesticides became more available and the do-it-yourself type stuff happening, that disconnect from nature happened at a much quicker rate. Our lawns became dirt instead of soil. And you know, for many people, that manicured lawn where you're putting chemicals on it is exactly what they're looking for. Not me. So I always try to push the other way for that. In order to really give an option for people around this area, we started building our own seed mixture. And we do this with a company called Ohio Prairie Nursery. And they're out of Ohio. They are a phenomenal prairie restoration, meadow restoration company. They travel out to Rochester every year. We look at all the plots. We really build products to everything that you can think. Conventional lawns have 4 species of plants in them, and they support roughly 16 species of insects. So the majority of the lawns that we have in Rochester right now, that's this top left-hand corner. The bottom left-hand corner is what you'll see alongside the state roads or maybe some of the county roads. There's another clover type in those that they'll use, and one other type of grass that actually can support up to 77 species. RIT did this work for us, by the way. They did a complete pollinator network of everything for us so we could see what we were supporting with our mix. This mix is our meadow mix, and this is the mix that we take to organizations like Kodak or Coca-Cola or RIT, you know, large landowners that really want the most bang for the buck. I will tell you, this is not like a $10 bag that you buy at Home Depot. In fact, this is by far the most expensive seed mix I've ever seen. We sell it for $136 a pound. And the coverage is like 10 pounds per acre. So you're looking at close to $1,500 per acre for just the seed for this. It is not for everybody, I get that. But this is the one for a corporation that's looking to win international awards for bringing animals back. This is the one that we give them. But that being said, this mix that we do sell supports over 600 species of pollinators. And you're talking insect pollinators. So we're not talking about any of the birds that will eat those or the small mammals that will come in. It is significantly more supportive of native and pollinating insects. And so we're just starting some of the studies with RIT for that. And we look at everything from, if you buy a milkweed seed in Ohio and that milkweed seed comes from Ohio, is it really the same as the New York milkweed seed? We know it's the same species, but do pests come after it more than the New York one? Does a New York bug eat the Ohio one quicker? Does it frost differently and get killed by frost? The initial studies that we found, that are about 13 different cities across this country, is there is no difference. It's negligible. So while there might be a little bit more chewed leaf on the milkweed, it doesn't hurt that milkweed at all. We've done studies to find salt tolerant ones. You know, we know in the winter that we salt the roads heavily around here, and that runoff goes into the lake. So how can native plants, are there any native grasses that will soak that salt up and eat that salt up quicker, that we can buffer some of the roads with? Really looking at those types of practical answers, or practical questions, I should say. This is Lunate longhorn cuckoo bee, which I really only put here because I wanted to say that out loud. But this is one of the animals that, you know, while everybody goes, oh yeah, it supports bees, this is a pretty rare bee that we support off from this mix. And I don't think it's critically endangered at this point here, but it is definitely one that's not seen. I mean, we support something like 15 species of cuckoo bees alone with this. And this is a parasitic bee. So they actually lay eggs in other animals and specifically other bees. So they aren't always seen as great things. But this little fat guy that's the rusty patch bumblebee. And this is a critically endangered bee in New York. So this is one that, you know, they get a bad rap, right? They're not gonna sting you. They're gonna float around like a Big Mac truck through the air and bump into a few things and buzz off, and that's essentially it. But you know, it's a big bad bee, right? So we have to pay attention when we're creating this type of habitat for public safety and perceptions around these. You know, so our programs through the city, we talk bees all the time to the Earth Explorer kids and our urban ecologists at all the rec centers all summer. And when we go out and do observations, we make sure that they maybe hold one of these bees so they understand that it's not gonna sting them. So no matter what we're doing, we're always trying to do programming around that as well. And then of course, monarch butterflies, right? It's kind of the keystone of what we think of when we think habitat. And certainly our Butterfly Beltway program was started around the thought of conserving monarch butterflies. And for sure, this is an animal that's in peril. I mean, you're looking at something that's a half a gram or a gram that's traveling 1,500 miles at a time, or 2,000 miles, or even more, which is absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, at their overwintering site, that's getting smaller and smaller, and there's more impact and more impact for the in their overwintering site. But you know, having the proper food, shelter, and host plant for this is really important. And you know, a lot of times we see that towns will have laws against things like milkweed, right? They don't want those tall weeds growing in homeowner association or alongside the road. So I pester and pester and pester to try to get all that stuff changed, and we'll continue to do it. And that leads into, you know, the thing that I always try to talk to people a little bit about is using clover in lawns. For instance, we have a 4-species clover mix that we sell that can outcompete grass. So there's no prep needed. You just need a couple of years for it to really grow out that overpower that grass. It stays low, so you mow it once, you never have to mow it again. So there's no problem with that. It's drought resistant. In fact, I'll show you. I don't know if this will come across really. It's kind of blurry. I apologize. But anywhere there's one of these asterisks is a plot of clover on green, and you can see that even with just grass, that the clover actually aesthetically, from what our traditional thoughts are on what a lawn should look like, the darker, richer green, right? And clover does that. So I'm currently working with the city of Rochester and a couple other places to try to start using more clover in the parks so we can get some of the maintenance and mowing costs down. So that's the first thing that I always try to push is looking at clover in your lawn. Secondly is native grasses. And I don't know if you've seen anything like this before, but turf, obviously on the left, is a few inches tall and you get a few inches of roots underneath it. But native grasses, I don't know if you can see this, it contrasts a little bit, but these are actually tied up, like if you tied long hair up behind you. And some native grasses have roots that go 15 feet down. So when you think about the ability to stop erosion or to do the other thing that we're now looking at, which is working in brownfields, right? So these can absorb heavy metals. And because they can absorb heavy metals through the roots and bring it up through the blade, you can actually go to an organization like Kodak or some of those brownfields downtown, plant native grass and passively remediate brownfields. That I was looking this morning, EPA pays out on average $600,000 per brownfield site to remediate. Give me $100 in seed and I'll go spread it, and we'll come once every year and cut it down. You know, it might take 5 or 10 years to do that, but and it won't work for super sites. You know, in a super site, it means that it's really contaminated and we have to go in and pull that soil out and clean the soil. So it's not going to work for that. But if you start to think about how easy and scalable it is for us to just plant a row of native grass around embankments or along stream banks or in between homeowners, even, there's a visual barrier for that you can create. But also, if say you have a homeowner that's treating with chemicals heavily and you're kind of sloped down from them and that's running down through the water, native grass will actually catch some of that and it'll pull it up through its leaves, and you can then disperse or dispose of those that greenery that has those heavy metals and things in it. So it really filters that soil and helps keep soil really healthy. So as we look back again to this slide, I really just want to take a second give you a second to look at that. Because I know, you know, Mitch works in school and we have library here, and I don't know what everybody else does, but I make sure that luckily I have snow leopards outside of my office, so I can go out and spend a minute, you know, just watching a snow leopard jump around and get my minute or two of nature. But what we're attempting to do is bring that thought of the homestead back to thinking about how you can actually have resources on site at your home and your homestead that will help connect to nature. And that's really, you know, that's the goal of everything that we do at the zoo, is to connect everybody to nature. So that was probably a bit different in what you were expecting when we were talking about pollinators and planting native, but I really wanted to show you that the problems are the same all over the world, really. And while it manifests itself differently, way differently, right? Just having that nature access and equity is something that is vitally important. And I know for me specifically, coming out of COVID, like I just need to get out and in nature a little bit and see what that is. And without a doubt, we are lucky at the zoo. We're an outdoor facility, so we weren't hurt nearly as bad as, you know, maybe some of the science centers and some of those places. But yeah, I just hope that we can continue to create habitat and we can continue to do programming around these areas and just create more and more green spaces and have a really connected community once we get this all going. And I see there's some questions. Oh, Mitch, you saw a fisher? That's great.
Yeah, it was a few years ago. It looked like a black cat, but it was crawling in the rocks, and it definitely wasn't a cat. So I was assuming that it was a fisher. I was thinking martin maybe, but
yeah, martins are a lot smaller, but fishers it probably was a fisher because they're coming back around. Otters as well are another animal that are making a comeback at this point in time. I've been to a few meetings with DEC on those. We actually unfortunately pulled a carcass from Dewey Avenue of a otter not so long ago. But they're at the point population wise where DEC is considering if they should allow trapping again. And I'm not, you know, we don't need to argue whether trapping is good or bad, but it's a really great thing that they're at the point of numbers that they can ask that question if it's been successful reintroductions. You know, a lot of those small mammals are the things that were really hurt by the urbanization and suburbanization of our planet. You know, more concrete is not conducive to a little small rat-like animal that likes to run from water source to water source. Minimum, let me go down through some of these. Minimum size plot for us to work. This is really interesting, right? Because I'm kind of constantly asked, like, well, what does 10 square feet do? It doesn't do anything. When you think of a bee, they have a radius of 2 miles roughly. We know what that radius is. They can see, you know, I don't know if you've ever looked at flowers in infrared, but it looks like an airport, right? They know where they go, oh, there it is, and they know where to land. So as long as there's these little plots within that 2 mile radius, those bees will find that. So I say, like, even a gallon potted plant, and Mitch we made up 500 packets that I think you're all going to sell at some point. Oh, you got them right there. They're roughly like 2 square feet to 5 square feet of maybe like 7 different species of flower that are in there, and partridge pea and thing like that. So I'm of the thinking like even a gallon works. And when you think about that, 300 gardens that we've done across maybe an hour or so from Rochester, they may all only be 10 feet by 10 feet, but that's like 24,000 square feet that we've done of that. And then as we do habitat restoration or even modified mowing, that's the key to the state agencies. I'll tell you, I went to the Department of Transportation and said, you need to bring back I-390. We need native pollinators all down through there. And they wouldn't even give me a call back, right? Like, so you get up and you just keep calling and calling until you get somebody that'll actually take your phone call. We had a planning session between me and a couple people with the DOT. They took it to the leadership, and we said one thing to them: budget neutral. And they go, oh, okay, what do you want to do? You know, and so it really is about just finding somebody that wants to do it. We are thinking about doing a program for some of the senior centers specifically, where we're doing windowsill pots for them. You know, so if they are immobile and can't go outside, how can we bring that small little piece of nature to them? And I assure you, if you walk out and see a nice little coreopsis or you know, one of these coneflower or one of these nice little plants, it's going to give you a moment of zen, right? Even if it's just a little potted plant. So I don't think any size is too small. We can go as small as we are putting all of our mixes we sell in our zoo shop. So you can either come to the zoo. We're going to, this is unfortunately another problem with COVID that came out of that, was we were actually going to start distributing to a whole bunch of businesses, so we could just have kind of seed packets everywhere. I believe Bracolo has some of them right now, but ultimately we want to get them out wherever. You can actually go to Ohio Prairie Nursery as well, their website. They sell a mix and will donate a little bit of money back to us. You can go to our website, senecaparkzoo.org, and there's a shop on that website, and we sell a 100 square foot mix, so it's enough to cover 100 square feet and enough to cover 250 square feet. Those are the two sizes we have in there right now, and we can get anything in within a week. To give you an idea of some of the mixes that we currently do, we have a solar mix. So if you think of all the solar arrays going up, they're monoculture, right? When you think about it, they're nothing but grass and things that increase the temperature. So if we can plant a native grass around that area and a clover underneath it with some flowers, now it's not just producing electricity, it's producing habitat. So that's one of our focus areas this year and moving forward is solar farms. We create an urban mix. An urban mix doesn't grow over 3 feet, because part of the problem in urban is that you don't want areas where you have 7 foot tall grass covering the whole lot, right? And that's unfortunate, but that's the very real story, is that can be problematic in many areas when you think about it. So we have an urban mix that's flower only. We have an urban mix that has grasses that have the root systems but don't get over 3 feet. We have a suburban or residential mix that's really only flowers, right? Because again, you don't want 7 foot grass in front of your front window. It doesn't really, well, maybe you do, I don't know, but you know, so it really, we're willing to make a mix for whatever. We've got a clover mix that's low grow, and then we have a clover mix that's for early pollinators. So one that has white clover in it and a ground flower in it that will be one of the first flowers that you'll see in the year. And that's vitally important for days like this, you know, when it is below freezing after it's been above freezing for a while. Days like this are not good for insects. And days where you have 4 or 5 days in February that are really warm are not good for insects. You know, they're interesting, right? We're looking at brood X this year with cicadas. And those things, when that soil at 6 inches down gets to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, they wake right up. You know, I mean, insects are really chemical in survival, right? So I think my landlord gets mad at me once in a while because my dandelions grow in, and I wait for him to really pester me until I mow the first time. So, but those days are really important for those. Melissa, you asked about the toxic waste clippings. It is toxic. The grass is toxic when you clip it. That is something that has to be remediated, but that's infinitely easier than digging out tons upon tons upon tons of soil. And it almost in some ways more labor intensive because it takes more time to do that. But I also think that, you know, if you've got 20 or 30 of those sites going, you know, with a month worth of work, then you're removing that once a year, you know. So we'll see. I hopefully will have some news on some of the brownfield remediation soon. I hope to be announcing a partnership where we're going to try some stuff in the city with that and see if it works. It definitely needs better science around it. We all know that theoretically it works. I don't know of anybody that's doing large scale tests on that, but it's certainly smart to explore it, and I think it's worth the risk to do it. So. The mini clover is not native, but we use three of the species of clover are native that we use in that mix. So our clover mix is not 100% native. Yeah, lots of mink. So Carolyn, you were talking about mink. Those that's one of those animals that sees biocompounding as well. So as we talk about remediation of brownfields and all of those things, the remediation of the Genesee River as well, right? They've taken a lot of soil out of that and filtered out a lot of silver and heavy metals from that. You may be aware that we work with U.S. Geological Survey on reintroduction of sturgeon in the river as well. Sturgeon are another animal that as we test them, we can see that the metals aren't what they used to be. Mink is one of those animals that's resilient. And so when we talk about native animals, specifically around this area, because that's where we are, we talk about resiliency an awful lot. You know, if you heard of the 1 cubic foot project that we did in 2015, we looked at how the small space, and that was my department that did that. So I was project lead on that. We looked at a small amount of space, right? And 1 cubic foot is really only this big. But the question was, what type of animal and how many animals could you find in the normal course of a day and night through this small space? So we chose, well, we didn't, a National Geographic photographer named David Lichtschwager chose the area across from Turning Point. And he chose that because it was an industrial site that used to have docks back in the day, and there was waste there. And it was really representative of what the Genesee River has been for a very long time. And representative of how we've forgotten that and how we used to think, right? Our solution to pollution is dilution, right? Just dump it in the lake. That's all you need to do. All that same type of mentality happens with our lawns as well. So we found 117 species that went through 1 cubic foot of space in the Genesee River in August. Of that, 17% of them were new to the Barcode of Life database, which is genetics. So we took a little piece of the genetics out of it and looked at the DNA and have a graphic representation of that DNA, and that goes into a database. We have a lifetime record now of those animals and what the genetics look like. So over time, you can tell a lot of stuff about that, right? Like there was an orange bluet, which is a type of damselfly that only lives in really murky, nasty water. We found the larval form and the adult form. That tells us that tells you a little snippet of the story of the river and what we've done to it. Air-breathing snails tell us that the snails that only live underwater aren't the only ones that live there. They need to get out of the water. So this species that is adapted to do that, to get out of nasty waters there. But then we also found, you know, caddisfly larvae, which need oxygenated water and really clean water. And so it was really interesting as we looked at the native the wildlife that we're seeing, we can almost morph the story and the natural history of Rochester through those insects that we find. And we do the same things when we plant these gardens. We look at what a healthy soil is, you know, not dirt, but what healthy soil is, because that's an organism, right? When we got to industrial revolution, we started looking at conquering and mining and taking things out of the environment. And making it our own and conquering that, right? And making it aesthetically what we felt was good. or was smart, and that most definitely is not the best connect. You can argue if it's the right way, but it's definitely not connected. And so for us, plant native is a really easy thing, right? There's plenty of resources online for that. You can very easily get a list of what you want to put in and aesthetically look and find things that you want. And it's just infinitely better than that. Ooh, pollinator mix growing. Let me see if I can find one. I didn't put one there. I'll see if I can find one.
There's another question. Where can we buy native grasses, and what are the names of the native grasses?
Oh, I knew someone was going to ask me names. Side-oaks grammar is one. Any of the blue stems are another one. Ohio Prairie does really good with grasses. So I would be happy after this to share a couple links with you, Cheryl, if you want to send it out to everybody afterwards. I'd be happy to do that. And I see that you also ask about clover mixes result in more bee stings. Not if you don't get the bee upset. It was funny. I will tell you one short story that I was just talking about yesterday. Was there were a group of scientists that did a study on bees to see if they could tell time, and they started putting the sugar water at 4 o'clock every day, and the bees would come out at 4 o'clock every day, and then they took the sugar water out, and the bees still came out, right? And, oh, they must be able to tell time. And then, as scientists, they go down through this thing. Well, it might have been the moon, it might have been the sun, it might have. So they continued doing all this stuff and all this stuff. Months and months and months went by where they just kept going like, well, yeah, I can tell time now because of this and this and this. And finally, somebody flew them to France and put them in a cave, and they came out of the hive at 10 a.m. in France in a cave, and they're like, they can tell time. So it doesn't really have so much to do with this, but it, these are instinctual animals, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so fight or flight is pretty much the only thing that they have. Numbers do not mean that they're aggressive. If their fight or flight instinct is triggered, then that's when people get stung. And for sure, people have an innate fear of bees and being stung, but the native bees aren't going to sting you, and the bumblebees aren't going to sting you, right? There's all those nasty wasps, they'll get you, but in the yellow jackets. But I don't think that there's anything that really shows that there's more stings. We did do a survey with the entire body of RIT though, and I think there was about 1,100 surveys done. And I'm sure you can guess what the number one concern with more flowers on campus is, and it's bee stings. So without a doubt, that is a barrier. The second thing that everybody wanted, no surprise in a tech school, was they wanted to convert all the athletic fields to nature areas. So I guess the tech school figured that everybody was working inside all the time. But yeah, you're never going to make everybody happy. But I know that when I go to RIT, I argue with landscape and facilities there all the time that, having some trimmed hedge doesn't do them any good for making that look more natural and lowering blood pressure for people on campus. And I pretty much say that wherever I go. So, Emily, you were asking about low growing clover. I don't know if that'll not upset your neighbors, because it seems like neighbors get upset for who knows how many ways and reasons. They'll certainly be less upset over that than if you put like 7-foot, side oats grammar in there, I think. I do know Dave Riddle, who runs Ohio Prairie, they've got a clover lawn. And I know that he has told me multiple times that when people move in times of drought, specifically, I don't know if we'll have that this year. We're certainly getting some rain now, and things are greened up really well right now. But say take last year, your clover lawn would have been just as green as it always would have been. And I to me, that's one of those kind of little wins that I try to tell people, right? Because if somebody's really worried about aesthetics and wants it to look good, that's a win that they go, oh geez, I can be drought resistant with this. I don't have to mow it 2 times a week or a week. I mow it once and you don't have to mow it again, theoretically. I mean, there may be some maintenance, but your maintenance costs will drop to almost nothing. Yeah, so let me think. Elizabeth, you were talking about the RIT study. They also did a study on the vacant lots there in 2017 that's really interesting. What they found, you know, they went through and looked at all the vacant lots, went to the communities where there were vacant lots and said, what do you want out of these? The overwhelming response was something. The bar was not high. And I find that that's really not, the bar's not high for any of this stuff. You know, people want a more natural, you don't want wild, right? Which is problematic sometimes with this. I think I told Mitch in one of the meetings earlier, we went out to the General Motors plant in Lockport, and they specifically wanted us to create natural habitat for them so they could go after this green award as General Motors Lockport. And looking at the deliverables, it was really about bringing wildlife back and making habitat. So I said, well, here's your options. Here's the one that I think will win this. And it was reclamation of about 1.5 acres, and it was wild. I mean, it was, I look at, we'll make it wild. People's view on wild it can be really kind of different, right? Messy. Wild is messy sometimes. And there's tricks to do that with hard lines and landscaping and things that you can do and pathways and things that make it look like it's meant to look that way. But proper habitat is messy, especially when it's secondary growth. I've been to jungles in Central America, Africa, Madagascar. Secondary growth is so hard to get through that you need machetes sometimes. And that's where life is, right? That's where the insects go to lay their eggs. That's where the sun comes down through the canopy. That's where the shelter and the water and the dew and everything that creates life is needed. And then it goes out from there. So those little hot spots are the really important thing. Yeah, Megan, solitary bees, a lot of them are ground dwelling too, and burrowers, you know, and they're not the big wasps with the big stingers, or the, I guess, murder hornets, right? Everybody calls them Japanese hornets, they're called, not murder hornets. Don't believe anybody. Yeah, so Elizabeth, again, right? Like a neighbor complains that it's ugly when you have milkweed. This is why I'm buying a place in the middle of the jungle and retiring there, so I don't have any neighbors, and then I can do what I want. And so yeah, and I would definitely point out those monarchs to your neighbor, right? And give them a little win, hopefully. Or just go spread those milkweed seeds over there, and in a year she'll have an entire patch in her lawn too.
There's a question from Deb. Will clover mix or native grasses help reduce weeds?
Clover will outcompete almost anything. And because clover can outcompete that, then it'll outcompete the weeds as well. You might have some of those, depending on your implementation of it. You know, the easiest thing is to get a spreader and spread it, and then just do the same thing at the end of that year, the beginning of the next, the end of that year, and it's there, and will outcompete that stuff. So yeah, clover's really great for that. Some of it doesn't take walking on it so well, but most of the time, as long as you're not trouncing on it, you know, same path every day, then it does just fine. I will check on the Zeus store. If it's not there, I gotta keep up on them sometimes. So we'll see about putting it up there if it's not there. I'll get it up by the end of the week if it's not. Any other questions?
There's one more in the chat from Anne. Do the native grasses spread aggressively? Say you want to have a border but not have it overtake.
Yeah, that is a maintenance spot for this, right? It depends on your usage. If it's a prairie, it doesn't matter if it spreads, but there is some clumping, and then there's some stuff that'll stay in a line relatively well. But anything like that, or the milkweed, you know, that's the problem with milkweed from an aesthetic angle, is that it does act like a weed, right? It's like mint. You know, if you find mint in your yard, all of a sudden next year it's covered 3/4 of it. And so milkweed and some of those grasses can do that. So there can be some maintenance with the native grasses as opposed to the clover. Mitch has a little flower mix that we put together that's, I think, 7 species of flowers. I got it right. And those are native. Those are meant for little you know, gallon pots and little 5 square foot. And Mitch, you can let them know when you're selling them if you want, or where you're selling them.
Yeah, so this Saturday from 4 to 7, we'll be tabling an event at Tree Town Cafe on Penfield Road. It's on the border of Brighton and Penfield. There'll be bonfire, special pizza deals. They're opening up their ice cream for the first time this weekend. Hopefully it'll be better than today. Should be a nice day. And we'll be selling these packets of perennial native pollinator mix. There'll be $1. And we'll also be selling some native trees that we've been growing in our nursery at a local church. We'll from 4 to 7. We have about 500 of these packets to sell, so hopefully people will stop by and get some.
Yeah, so I'll make sure by the end of the week that we've got everything up on the Zeus shop. We just launched that a couple months ago, so probably all the product is there yet. As well, I will say, if you are interested in that stuff and you just want an update from me, this is my email.
And also, Dina has everyone's email if you call to ask to sign up. So at the library, so I can get all your emails from her and send you any information that Tom sends me. And I'll also put anything you send me, Tom. I'll put up on the colorbrightandgreen.org
Oh, great.
website along
Yeah,
with this video.
I'll put a few resources together for you so you can look at that and see where you can buy some stuff, and links to Ohio Prairie's page if you're interested in some of that stuff.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Tom?
Did you think we were going to talk about Madagascar when you came in here?
I loved it. I loved it because everything is connected. Yeah.
It's really what we try to do, right? I'll tell you, it's awful hard sometimes when somebody comes into the zoo and says, but what can I do for a Bornean orangutan, right? I mean, we're in Rochester and you're talking about Borneo. So we really tend to try to connect everything as much as possible.
Okay. Well, we thank you so much for your time. It was incredibly interesting. Every moment was so interesting, and we really appreciate it and all your knowledge. Thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah, and thank you for your time, everyone. Appreciate it, and I'll make sure that I put a few things together for you. Okay.
And thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Real